I never saw it coming. That's what haunts me the most about that Tuesday evening in October. The Chicago wind was picking up, scattering golden leaves across our driveway as I pulled in after another long day at the office. I remember thinking about how the Halloween decorations Jessica had put up made our two-story colonial look like something out of a Better Homes and Gardens magazine. She always had an eye for those details. Tommy's blue bike was lying on its side near the garage, and I made a mental note to remind him about putting his things away. Just another normal day in suburban life. Or so I thought. The moment I stepped through our front door, the silence hit me first. Usually, Tommy would be running down the stairs, eager to show me his latest Lego creation or tell me about his day at kindergarten. The house smelled of Jessica's signature lavender candles, but something felt off. She was sitting at our kitchen island, still in her work clothes, a stack of papers in front of her. "We need to talk, Mike." Her voice was steady, emotionless, like she was about to discuss our monthly budget or planning the next neighborhood barbecue. I loosened my tie, hanging my jacket on the back of a chair. "Sure, what's up?" "Where's Tommy?" "He's at my mother's." That should have been my first warning sign. Jessica never sent Tommy to her mother's on weekdays. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air like smoke, choking me. I stood there, briefcase still in hand, trying to process what she'd just said. "What?" It was all I could manage. "I've already spoken with a lawyer. These are the papers." She slid the stack across the granite countertop we'd picked out together just last year. My legs felt weak, and I had to sit down. "Jessica, what are you talking about? If this is about me working late again, I can cut back. The project deadline is next month, and after that, it's not about your work hours, Mike. It's about us. We're not working anymore." I stared at her. This woman I'd known for 9 years, married for 7. The woman who'd cried tears of joy when Tommy was born. The woman who still wrote little notes in my lunch bag, even though we were both pushing 40. Not working? Since when? We just had dinner with the Harises last weekend. Everything was fine. Jessica's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the counter. Everything wasn't fine. Nothing has been fine for a long time. I've just been better at hiding it. The familiar warmth of our kitchen suddenly felt cold and foreign. Through the window, I could see our neighbor Bob walking his golden retriever, completely unaware that my world was imploding just feet away. "Can we talk about this? Maybe see a counselor?" I heard the desperation in my voice and hated it. "I've made up my mind, Mike. I want the house, the Lexus, and primary custody of Tommy." The clinical way she listed her demands made my stomach turn. "Primary custody? He's my son too, Jessica. You're barely here. Between your coding sessions and late meetings, Tommy sees more of his teachers than he does of you." Each word felt like a knife. Yes, I worked long hours, but it was all for them. The private preschool Tommy attended, the luxury SUV Jessica drove, the yearly trips to Disney World. None of that came cheap. That's not fair. Everything I do for this family. Maybe that's part of the problem. You're so focused on providing that you forgot about being present. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but memories of missed soccer practices and abbreviated bedtime stories flashed through my mind. "What are you telling Tommy?" My voice cracked at the thought of our son. "He knows mommy and daddy need some time apart. He's young, he'll adjust." The casualness with which she discussed appending our 5-year-old's world made me nauseous. Just like that? 9 years together, and you're ready to throw it all away. Jessica stood up, smoothing her pencil skirt. "My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. I suggest you find one of your own." She walked out of the kitchen, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors we'd installed together one weekend last summer. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the divorce papers. Our wedding photo still hung on the wall, mocking me with its frozen smiles and promises of forever. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and heated discussions. Jessica's lawyer was aggressive, pushing for a settlement that would leave me financially drained. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, taking only what I could fit in my Honda Civic. The first weekend Tommy came to stay with me was both wonderful and heartbreaking. Daddy, why isn't your house big like before? His innocent question over pizza dinner made me want to cry. Sometimes things change, buddy. But you know what's cool about this place? We can see the trains from the window. I tried to make it an adventure, but every time he had to leave, it felt like losing him all over again. Jessica's demands grew more unreasonable with each passing week. $3,000 a month in child support, despite the fact that I was now paying rent and still contributing to the mortgage on our family home. My savings were disappearing fast. The stress began affecting my work at TechCorp, where I'd been a senior software engineer for over a decade. Lines of code blurred together as I struggled to focus. Project deadlines started slipping. My team lead, Dave, called me into his office one Thursday morning. Mike, we need to talk about your performance lately. I sat in the uncomfortable chair across from his desk, already knowing where this was heading. Look, I know you're going through some personal stuff, and we've tried to be understanding, but the Wilson account is 3 weeks behind schedule. I can fix it, Dave. Just give me a few more days. He sighed, taking off his glasses. It's not just the Wilson account. The whole team is having to pick up your slack. We can't keep doing that. I thought about the mortgage, the child support, Tommy's private school tuition. Please, Dave. I've been here 12 years. You know my work. This is just temporary. I'm sorry, Mike. We're going to have to let you go. The severance package was generous by most standards, but with my monthly obligations, it wouldn't last long. I applied for every software development position I could find, but the market was tight. The offers that did come in were for junior positions, paying less than half what I'd been making. 3 months after losing my job, I missed my first child support payment. Jessica's response was immediate and ruthless. Her lawyer filed a complaint with the court the very next day. The phone call started, each one more threatening than the last. You can't just stop paying because you're too lazy to find a proper job, Jessica spat during one particularly heated conversation. I'm trying, Jessica. I've had 3 interviews this week alone. Try harder. Tommy needs new winter clothes, and his piano lessons aren't free. The irony of her complaints about money while living in our fully paid-for house, driving the car I was still making payments on, wasn't lost on me. But it was the next part that really got to me. Maybe if you spent less time feeling sorry for yourself and more time being a responsible father. I hung up before she could finish. The worst part wasn't the financial strain or Jessica's verbal jabs. It was watching Tommy's confusion grow with each visit. Why don't you come to my soccer games anymore, Daddy? Because the games were on Wednesday afternoons, and I was working part-time at a local coding boot camp to make ends meet. Why can't I sleep in my old room when I visit? Because Daddy couldn't afford a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood anymore. Every question was a reminder of how far I'd fallen. Then came the morning that changed everything. The knock on my apartment door at 6 a.m. was like something out of a nightmare. 2 police officers stood in the hallway, their expressions grim. Michael Anderson? I nodded, my heart pounding. You're under arrest for failure to pay child support. The cold metal of the handcuffs against my wrists felt surreal. As they led me down the stairs, past my elderly neighbor Mrs. Chin watering her plants, all I could think about was Tommy. What would Jessica tell him about why Daddy wasn't there for their weekend together? How would he understand any of this? The back of the police car was cramped and smelled of stale cigarettes. Through the window, I watched the city wake up, people heading to their normal jobs, living their normal lives. How had mine spun so completely out of control? The booking process was humiliating. Fingerprints, mugshot, personal belongings, and a PL. Astic bag. The cell they put me in was cold and bare, with a thin mattress and a stainless steel toilet. My cellmate was a burly man named Ray, who was surprisingly sympathetic when I told him why I was there. Child support, huh? Welcome to the club, brother. Systems rigged against us dads. I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. The court appearance was scheduled for the next morning. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the choices that had led me here. The long hours at work I'd thought were necessary. The family dinners I'd missed because of urgent meetings. The weekend spent debugging code instead of building blanket forts with Tommy. Had Jessica been right? Had I been so focused on being a provider that I'd forgotten how to be present? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a constant reminder of where I was. In my mind, I could hear Tommy's laugh, see his gap-toothed smile. Would he still look at me the same way when he found out his father had been in jail? As I lay there on that hard prison cot, I made a promise to myself. No matter what it took, I would find a way to make things right. Not just for me, but for Tommy. He deserved better than this. Better than a father who couldn't provide. Better than parents who couldn't put his needs first. The night stretched on endlessly, each minute marked by the echoing sounds of doors closing and guards making their rounds. Tomorrow I would face a judge. Tomorrow I would learn what price I would pay for failing to meet my obligations. But tonight, in this cold cell, all I could do was wait. Wait and remember the life I used to have. The life I needed to somehow get back. The courthouse downtown was a maze of marble and anxiety. My court-appointed lawyer, Alan Meyer, met me in a small conference room that smelled of coffee and desperation. The good news is Judge Martinez tends to be reasonable in these cases, he said, shuffling through my file. I tried to focus on his words, but my wrinkled jumpsuit and handcuffs made it hard to feel anything but shame. What's the bad news? Alan adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. Your ex-wife's lawyer is pushing for maximum penalties. 6 months jail time, plus hefty fines. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I processed this information. 6 months? I'll lose everything. My apartment, any chance at a new job. I know. That's why we're going to focus on your efforts to find employment. You've been to how many interviews? 17 in the past 2 months. I can document all of them. Alan nodded, making notes. Good. And you've been working part-time, teaching coding basics at Code Academy. It barely covers my rent, but it's something. The door opened, and a guard appeared. Time. Walking into the courtroom felt like entering another world. Jessica sat in the front row, perfectly put together in a navy blazer and pearls. She didn't look at me. Jew. Dage Martinez was a man in his 60s, with reading glasses perched low on his nose. He studied my file while Alan presented our case. Your Honor, my client has made every effort to meet his obligations. The loss of his job was not voluntary, and he's actively seeking new employment. Jessica's lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit, stood up. Mr. Anderson's failure to maintain his employment and meet his support obligations shows a pattern of irresponsible behavior. His child deserves better. I wanted to scream that Tommy deserved a mother who didn't weaponize him against his father. But I stayed silent, remembering Alan's advice to let him do the talking. Judge Martinez looked at me over his glasses. Mr. Anderson, do you understand the seriousness of failing to meet your child support obligations? Yes, Your Honor. I've never missed a payment before losing my job. I love my son more than anything. His expression softened slightly. I can see from your record that you've been consistent in the past. However, the law requires these obligations to be met. My heart pounded as he prepared to deliver his sentence. 30 days in county jail, plus 200 hours of community service to be completed within 6 months of release. I heard Jessica's sharp intake of breath. She'd clearly been expecting worse. Additionally, you'll be required to attend financial counseling sessions and provide monthly updates on your job search. The relief was overwhelming. 30 days was manageable. Not good, but manageable. Thank you, Your Honor. As the guards led me out, I caught a glimpse of Jessica's face. For a moment, she looked almost disappointed. County jail was different from the holding cell. My cellmate this time was a former accountant named Steve who'd lost everything in the 2008 crash. First week's the hardest, he told me as I settled onto the bottom bunk. After that, you find a routine. He was right. Days fell into a pattern of meals, yard time, and long hours in the common area playing cards with other inmates. Many of them were there for similar reasons: child support, unpaid tickets, minor violations that snowballed into bigger problems. I spent my nights writing letters to Tommy. Jessica probably wouldn't give them to him, but I needed him to know I was thinking about him. Dear Tommy, I miss you so much, buddy. I'm sorry I couldn't be there for your soccer game last weekend. Daddy's having to work on some things right now. I never mentioned where I really was. How do you explain jail to a 5-year-old? The financial counseling session started while I was still inside. Denise Williams, the counselor assigned to my case, didn't waste time with sympathy. Your skill set is valuable, but you're not marketing yourself effectively, she said during our first meeting. She wore no-nonsense suits and spoke with the directness of someone used to dealing with financial disasters. The tech industry has changed since you started at Tech Corp. We need to update your approach. Over the next few weeks, she helped me rebuild my resume, focusing on recent projects and relevant skills. Stop thinking like an employee, she advised. Start thinking like a consultant. Your experience is worth more if you package it right. The community service assignment came as a surprise. Instead of picking up trash on the highway like I'd expected, I was assigned to a youth center in a struggling neighborhood on the south side. The center needed help maintaining their computer lab and teaching basic programming to kids. My first day there, still wearing an ankle monitor, I met Marcus Johnson, the center's director. Most of these kids have never seen someone who looks like you working in tech, he said bluntly. Show them it's possible. The kids were a mix of middle and high school students, hungry for knowledge and opportunity. Teaching them reminded me why I'd fallen in love with coding in the first place. Their excitement when a program finally worked, their creative approaches to problems, it was infectious. One student, a bright 14-year-old named Deshaun, reminded me of myself at that age. Mr. Mike, can you really make money just writing code? His eyes lit up when I told him about the apps I'd developed. Man, I want to do that. My mom works 2 jobs, and I want to help her someday. For the first time in months, I felt useful again. The days passed faster than I expected. Between the counseling sessions, community service, and my part-time teaching job, I barely had time to feel sorry for myself. Denise's advice started paying off. A startup founder who attended one of my coding workshops offered me consulting work. It wasn't steady employment, but it was a start. Then came the email that changed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday evening, just as I was finishing up at the youth center. The sender was Rachel Martinez, Jessica's best friend from college. My finger hovered over the delete button, but something made me open it. Mike, I've been struggling with whether to send this for weeks. What I'm about to tell you isn't easy, but you deserve to know the truth. My hand started shaking as I read on. Jessica's been seeing someone else. His name is Chris Martinez, no relation to me. And it didn't start after your separation. It started before Tommy was born. The computer screen blurred as I tried to process what I was reading. I've attached screenshots of conversations I witnessed. She's been collecting money from both of you, child support from you, and secret payments from Chris. He's married too, and she's been using that to manipulate him. The attached images showed text messages, bank transfers, emails, a paper trail of betrayal. But it was the last paragraph that truly gutted me. Mike, I know this will be hard to hear, but given the timeline, there's a real possibility that Tom, why isn't your biological son? I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. The youth center was quiet, the kids long gone. Through the window, I could see the Chicago skyline lit up against the darkening sky. The city looked the same, but my world had shifted on its axis once again. Tommy, my son, the child I'd read bedtime stories to. The boy who called me daddy and ran to me with skinned knees and proud artwork. Could he really not be mine? The thought was physically painful. I called Alan as soon as I got home. "We need to request a paternity test," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I want to press charges for fraud." The legal wheels began turning again, but this time I wasn't the one on defense. Jessica fought the paternity test every step of the way. Her lawyer argued it would be traumatic for Tommy, but Judge Martinez, now familiar with our case, ordered the testing. The procedure itself was simple. A quick cheek swab in a sterile clinic room. Tommy thought it was funny, giggling as the nurse demonstrated. "Tickles, Daddy." I held on to that moment, his innocent laughter, his trust in me. Whatever the results showed, this was my son. The waiting was excruciating. 2 weeks that felt like 2 years. I threw myself into work, taking on extra consulting projects, anything to keep my mind occupied. The kids at the youth center became my anchor. Their problems, struggling with loops in Python, debugging their first programs, were refreshingly straightforward. Deshaun was making remarkable progress. He'd started working on a simple game, determined to finish it before the summer ended. "Mr. Mike, check this out." His excitement over fixing a bug reminded me of Tommy's joy at mastering his bicycle. The comparison brought both comfort and pain. Finally, the envelope arrived. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at it for what felt like hours. The return address was from the testing facility, the paper thick and official. With trembling hands, I opened it. The medical terminology and statistics blurred together, but one number stood out starkly: 0% probability of paternity. The room seemed to spin. I grabbed the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. All this time, all these years, the memories flooded in, taking on new, painful meanings. Tommy's dark hair, so different from my blonde. Jessica's insistence on handling all his medical appointments herself. The way she'd sometimes look at him with a strange expression I could never quite read. I stumbled to the bathroom and threw up. When I could finally stand again, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The face looking back at me was both familiar and strange. A father who wasn't a father. A man who'd been living a lie. But as the initial shock began to fade, something else took its place. Anger. Not just at Jessica, but at the entire system that had pushed me to the brink while she played her games. The child support payments that had nearly destroyed me. The jail time I'd served. The shame I'd endured. All based on a lie. I called Alan again. This time, my voice was cold with determination. "I want everything. The fraud charges, the support payments returned, all of it." "Mike," he said carefully, "what about Tommy?" The question hit me like a physical blow. What about Tommy? The boy who still ran to me with pure joy every time I picked him up for our weekends together. Who didn't know anything about DNA or betrayal or the complexities of adult relationships. Who just knew me as Daddy. "He's my son," I said finally. "Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. I'm not giving up on him." Alan was quiet for a moment. "Okay, let's do this right then. We'll need to document everything." The next few weeks were a blur of legal preparations. Rachel provided a formal statement about what she'd witnessed. Bank records were subpoenaed. And most damaging of all, Chris Martinez, faced with the possibility of his own wife discovering everything, agreed to testify about Jessica's manipulation. The house of cards was finally about to fall. But as I prepared for the upcoming court battle, I couldn't shake the image of Tommy's face. His innocent trust. His unquestioning love. Whatever happened next, I had to protect him. He'd already lost too much to the games adults play. I wouldn't let him lose his father too. Biology be damned. The morning of the final hearing dawned cold and clear. Chicago's autumn had painted the trees along Michigan Avenue in brilliant reds and golds. I stood outside the courthouse, watching my breath form clouds in the crisp air. My parents had driven in from Milwaukee to show their support. No matter what happens in there, My mother said, squeezing my hand. Tommy is our grandson. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread through the legal community, a cautionary tale of fraud and manipulation. Jessica sat with her lawyer, wearing a conservative gray suit that made her look almost nun-like. The mask of innocence didn't suit her anymore. Chris Martinez sat on the opposite side, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. His wife hadn't come. Their own divorce proceedings had started last week. Judge Martinez entered, and the room fell silent. Alan started with our opening statement, laying out the evidence methodically. The paternity test results, the bank records showing Jessica's double-dipping, the text messages proving her manipulation. Rachel's testimony came first. She spoke clearly, describing how she'd witnessed Jessica's scheme unfold. She would laugh about it sometimes, Rachel said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Called it her retirement plan, getting money from both Mike and Chris. Jessica's lawyer tried to paint Rachel as a jealous friend with a grudge. But the evidence was too solid, the paper trail too clear. Then came C.H. Chris Martinez's testimony. He looked straight ahead, avoiding Jessica's gaze as he described their arrangement. She threatened to tell my wife everything if I didn't keep paying. Said she'd make sure I never saw Tommy. And did you want to see Tommy? Alan asked. Chris shifted uncomfortably. I have my own family. I just wanted it all to go away. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Jessica's perfect facade began to crack. When it was her turn to testify, her usual confidence had vanished. I was just trying to provide for my son, she insisted. Mike was always working, never there. I needed security. Security? Alan's voice was sharp. You were living in a fully paid house, driving a luxury car, all while collecting money from two different men. Jessica's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The truth was finally coming out. When it was my turn to take the stand, I felt strangely calm. Alan asked about my history with Tommy, my time in jail, the community service that had helped me rebuild. And now that you know Tommy isn't your biological son, what do you want? I looked directly at Jessica as I answered. I want justice for the fraud, yes. But more than that, I want to be Tommy's father. Even though he's not your biological child, biology doesn't make a father. Love does. Showing up does. Being there does. And you're willing to continue in that role. I'm the only father he's ever known. The man who taught him to ride a bike, who reads him bedtime stories, who loves him unconditionally. I took a deep breath. Chris Martinez may be his biological father, but he doesn't want that role. I do. I always have. The judge's ruling came swiftly and decisively. The evidence of fraud in this case is overwhelming, he began. Ms. Anderson, your actions show a calculated pattern of deception and manipulation. Jessica seemed to shrink in her chair. You deliberately deceived Mr. Anderson about his paternity, extracted child support payments under false pretenses, and simultaneously blackmailed Mr. Martinez. The judge adjusted his glasses. This court sentences you to 24 months in federal prison for fraud. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Furthermore, you will be required to repay all child support payments made by Mr. Anderson with interest. But it was the next part that mattered most to me. As for custody of the minor child, Tommy Anderson, the room held its breath. Given Mr. Martinez's explicit rejection of parental rights, and considering the strong bond between Mr. Anderson and the child, this court awards full custody to Michael Anderson. Relief flooded through me. Tommy was still mine. The aftermath of the trial brought rapid changes. Jessica was led away in handcuffs, her carefully constructed world finally crumbling. My parents helped me find a small house in a good school district. Tommy's transition was surprisingly smooth. Kids are resil. And at 5, he accepted the new arrangement with remarkable adaptability. The youth center offered me a permanent position as their technology director. The salary was less than I'd made at Tech Corp, but the flexibility and fulfillment made up for it. Deshaun and the other students became like extended family. Watching them grow and learn helped heal something in me. My consulting business grew steadily on the side. Denise's advice about marketing myself differently had paid off. The community that had supported me during my darkest days now provided networking opportunities I'd never expected. Tommy thrived in his new school. His teacher remarked on his creativity and kindness, traits that had nothing to do with DNA. On weekends, we explored Chicago together. The Field Museum became our favorite spot. Tommy loved the dinosaurs, and I loved watching his eyes light up with wonder. We built new traditions. Saturday morning pancake experiments. Sunday afternoon coding sessions where I taught him basic Scratch programming. Look, Daddy, I made the cat dance. His excitement was pure and untainted by the adult complications that had brought us here. 2 years passed quickly. When Jessica was released, she was a changed woman. Prison had stripped away her polished exterior, leaving someone more raw, but perhaps more real. Our first meeting was awkward. She sat across from me in a downtown coffee shop, hands wrapped around her cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "How is he?" she asked softly. "He's good. Happy. Doing well in school." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I'm sorry, Mike, for everything." The words seemed inadequate for the damage she'd caused, but her voice carried genuine remorse. "I know." We worked out a supervised visitation schedule. Tommy needed his mother, despite everything. But the terms were clear. One misstep, one attempt to manipulate the situation, and it would end. Life settled into a new normal. The youth center expanded its programs, reaching more kids who reminded me daily why second chances matter. Deshaun graduated high school and earned a scholarship to study computer science at Illinois Tech. He still came by the center to mentor younger students. Tommy grew taller, smarter, more curious about the world. Sometimes he asked questions about the past. Why did Mommy go away for a while? Why don't we live in the old house anymore? I answered honestly, but age-appropriately, always emphasizing one unchangeable truth. He was loved. One evening, as we sat on our small back porch watching the sunset, Tommy looked up from his tablet where he'd been working on a simple coding project. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy." "Jimmy at school says everyone gets half their DNA from their dad and half from their mom." My heart skipped a beat. We'd known this conversation would come eventually. "That's usually true," I said carefully. "But families come in all different ways. WH. What matters isn't DNA, it's love." He thought about this for a moment, his face serious. "So you're my dad because you love me?" "I'm your dad because I've loved you since before you were born, because I choose to be your dad every single day, and because nothing in the world could ever change that." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Cool. Can you help me fix this bug in my game?" Just like that, we moved on, because in the end, that's what family does. It adapts, it grows, it loves through the hard times. Looking back now, I realized that losing everything had actually given me everything that mattered. A stronger relationship with my son, a career that made a difference, a life built on truth rather than appearances. The Chicago skyline glowed orange in the setting sun. Tommy's laughter echoed from the porch as he finally got his code to work. This was my real success story. Not the house in the suburbs, or the corporate job, or the perfect-looking family. But this, a boy who called me dad because of love, not biology. A purpose bigger than myself. A life rebuilt on a foundation of truth and resilience. Sometimes I drive past our old house in the suburbs. The Halloween decorations are different now, the garden less pristine. But I don't feel the ache I used to. That life, with its facade of perfection, wasn't real. This life, modest house, meaningful work, genuine relationships, this is real. And Tommy, my son in every way that matters, is thriving. That's all any father could ask for. As we head inside for dinner, Tommy's hand slips into mine. Love you, Dad. 3 simple words that make everything worthwhile. Love you too, buddy. Always have. Always will. Biology be damned.